Hey folks, this is a video about finding the sine parent graph. You'll notice that I have an XY chart over in the top right hand corner of your screen. XY charts we know are for graphing coordinates, and we're going to get a whole list of coordinates. Notice that all of my X values are the values that go around the unit circle in radians. My Y values are going to be what I find when I'm on the unit circle and I take the sine of each position. So that is going to become my Y value. Don't get confused. I know that the sine values on the unit circle are also the Y values. So just remember that that's kind of two different things that I'm looking at there. So take your unit circle out because we're going to be going around the unit circle as we find these Y values. So on the unit circle, look at the position 0, and take the sine at 0. The sine at 0 is 0 because the Y value on the unit circle is 0. Move around to pi over 6. The sine at pi over 6 is 1/2. The sine at pi over 4 is root 2 over 2. The sine at pi over 3 is root 3 over 2. And at the end of the first quadrant, the sine of pi over 2 is 1. So that takes care of our first quadrant. And again, when I'm talking about finding the sine of a certain position, that's the Y value of the coordinate on the unit circle. And this is becoming the Y value that I'm going to graph here in just a bit. Let's go into the second quadrant. And I'm going to uncover all of these at the same time. So in the second quadrant, all of my Y values are going to be as follows. Root 3 over 2, root 2 over 2, 1/2, and 0. And then if you'll go into the third quadrant Y values on the unit circle are going to be negative 1/2, negative root 2 over 2, negative root 3 over 2, and negative 1. Remember, these are going down because they're the Y values on the unit circle. That's why they're negative. And then into the fourth quadrant. So we have the sine at 5 pi over 3 is going to be negative root 3 over 2, negative root 2 over 2, negative 1/2, and 0 are going to be all of my Y values. Now, in order to graph these, I need some decimal values. Of course, we already know that 1/2's decimal value is 0.5. No big deal there. Root 2 over 2 has a decimal value of 0.7071. And root 3 over 2 has a decimal value of 0.8660. And we'll use that as we go to graph. So now what we'll do is we'll pretend that each of these is a coordinate, an XY pair. And I've already got the X's marked along the X-axis. Notice here a couple of things. I have these kind of portioned out by quadrant. So there's the first quadrant with pi over 4 smack dab in the middle and pi over 2 at the end of the first quadrant. And then I've got the second quadrant where 3 pi over 4 is in the middle, pi is at the end. And then here's my third quadrant, and here's my fourth quadrant. Notice also, if I'm only looking at the first quadrant, remember that on your unit circle, in the first quadrant, you had 3 values marked in the first quadrant. I don't have all these marked on the x-axis, but they are marked as tick marks. So your first value into the unit circle is pi over 6. The second value is pi over 4, and the third value is pi over 3. And then up at the axis is pi over 2. So just understand that I have these marked on the x-axis. I just haven't written what their values are. Also, if you'll notice, I have a tick mark marked 10 blocks up. This is going to be my value of 1 because Y equaling 1 is my largest value on the unit circle. And then negative 1 is down at the bottom, 10 blocks down. So now let's just go ahead and find all of the plotting our points here by using our XY chart. So our first one is going to be at 0, 0. At pi over 6, we're going to go up 5 blocks. Since 1 is equal to 10 blocks, 5 is half of 1. Pi over 4 is root 2 over 2, which is, I'm going to say it's 7 blocks, that 0.7 number. Pi over 3 is root 3 over 2. That's 0.866. It's easy if I go about 8.5 blocks. Pi over 2, all the way up 10 blocks because that's going to hit me all the way at 1. And then just go all the way around on that XY chart and continue filling in each of your coordinates by what we just found going around the unit circle. And you'll see as I mark these around that this does form a nice wave. These are not just straight and pointy mountains. These are nice curves. So there's the curve for my first quadrant. There's the curve for my second quadrant, my third quadrant, and my fourth quadrant. And that is the parent sine wave.